which is part and parcel of performance and finance. This really is to concern what we expect out of commercial, what we want out of procurement. So one of the things I think we need to understand initially is what the commercial services procurement do, and we've asked Chris Williams to come along to give us a brief description, because I know he could talk for an hour. So if you could give us a brief description, an overall view of how we go about procurement, how procurement is different from going along and going to a shop and buying something. I think it's important to understand how we do it, what we're doing, and the methods we use. If that's okay with everyone.
Sorry, Chris, can we just go through the practicalities of apologies and stuff? Sorry.
Yeah, I do apologise. I should have done that bit first. Right, first of all, is any apologies, Michelle?
We have no apologies today.
Okay.
From Bridget Rowlands, actually, she just contacted me.
Right. Okay. On top of that, then we have, as you know, all scrutiny meetings, and I think it go without saying, is the prohibition of whip votes, etc. And I think that goes without saying, doesn't it? So if that's the formal bit, Michelle?
No public questions either. So.
Yeah. Okay, and Mary?
Disclosures of interest, Chair. I'm a member of a number of boards of trustees of organisations that might be affected by council procurement processes. They're all on my register of interests. I wonder if I should certainly declare that at least. Do you need me to name the organisations now, Michelle, or is it all right if I just refer
just declare it, and I'll send you a form to complete afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I think we need to understand it. Okay, fair enough. I understand that. Anyone else? If that isn't the case, then David, do you want to say a few words beforehand, or do you want to hand over to Chris?
No, if you could just start off by thanking everybody, and particularly yourself as chair of the scrutiny panel this morning. Thank you for the invite. I think it's important that everybody in the council gets an understanding of procurement. And I think it's something that we need probably to get some training sessions up and running probably after your scrutiny inquiry. But I'm very proud of what takes place within Swansea, particularly during the pandemic. The pandemic proved what a valuable service we got within Swansea with procurement. And I must say, they pulled every stop out with PPE. They worked very closely with social services and everybody else within the council to ensure that we had, a regular supply of PPE. So I don't want to delay matters this morning, but I think we've got a very proactive procurement thing. We've got only 4 people plus Chris within procurement, so 8.5 people within procurement, but that number don't reflect the work that goes on there. It's really proactive, very proud of their record, and I don't want to delay the talking this morning, but I think you will see after the thing what goes on in procurement is very interesting. So Chris, more than happy, Councillor Holly, more than happy to hand back.
Not a problem, Dave, not a problem. And it is, I was Chris before I was councillor, so it doesn't make any difference. Okay, then Chris, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Councillor Holly. So Chris Williams, I'm an officer in the council. So I presented a written report for the panel. So my intent is just to briefly go through that. So you'll have seen there's a main report providing an outline of how we engage with our suppliers to show the robust process we employ in doing that. And then there are 2 case studies which are added to provide a bit more depth, a bit more sort of flesh to the debate. And Councillor Holly asked me for those specific cases. So just to provide, I'm not sure if we'll go through those cases in depth today, depends on how much time you want to allocate, but they sort of translate the way we work into practical examples of how we deliver on the ground. I think the idea with if we were to have sort of 2 ends of a scale in terms of what we do, One end of the scale is where we're at, which is we want a robust process where we regularly go out to market, where we look for innovation from our suppliers, where we encourage that level of competition. Or you could say the other end of that scale is where you never ask for new suppliers. And what typically happens if you don't have that regular review of what's going on is you generally end up with having higher prices and lower quality. So that's the sort of two pillars of how you work, and we want that innovation, we want that change, we want that consideration of what we do, and that's what you're trying to deliver through this process. So if I move to the report that's being circulated, which I assume is this one. So can I ask, Councillor Holly, is that on the screen for you, the report?
Yeah, that's fine.
So I'll briefly go through it. We've got an initial definition. We'll talk about in 1.2 the amount of money we spend on the full range of things that we do. You know, as a government body, we operate in a very broad setting. I made that point there. So procurement rules and regulations, they're an important part of the debate in this area, particularly this sort of, as mentioned in 2.1, these United Kingdom public contract regulations, they provide the framework in which we go out to market. And they basically want transparency in what we do, to ensure a level playing field in how we deal with our suppliers. So again, we're not just going to be biased in what we do, for example. Now, a lot of discussion around Brexit, you know, what changes that has brought. So what I would note under 2.2 is, whilst we have left the European Union's sort of legal ambit, we are still using the same rules at the moment. There is a great deal of debate going on, both at the Welsh level and the UK level, about what happens next. The Welsh government is currently considering how it does have the right to create its own procurement rules, and it's considering how it might respond in that matter. Obviously, with the recent election, that is now a decision for the new administration, so we're waiting to hear from that. The second point to make in that is that even though we left the European Union, we have joined something called the World Trade Organization, which brings its own level of governance to the picture, and again means we should go out to the market and openly advertise our tenders, for example. So it's not necessarily a blank playing field we'll be working with. We'll be working under these new WTO rules, World Trade Organization rules, which will again mean we have to go out to the market and openly advertise our contracts, which in general I personally agree with. So in addition to the United Kingdom, these rules, these laws that we work with, we also have our own council contract procedure rules that govern how we run our procurement. And Councillor Holly, you were part of the Council's Constitutional Working Group, which reviewed them just before the pandemic. We signed those off, the rules. So they're in the web link there. And they provide a sort of an A to Z of how we should engage with suppliers, how we should work when we're seeking to spend public money. And again, show that transparency and robust system behind the scenes. So if it's okay with you, Councillor, I won't go into those at the moment unless you want me to click into those to go through those rules. Yeah, I'll let you do this.
I don't think so. I think you know, that's a nerdy thing for us, for some of us. That is so I don't think there's any need for that today.
Great. So then I talk under 2.3 very briefly about these are what are called spending thresholds. If you spend more than, and this is the current rate, £189,000, 330, you have to openly advertise through a prescriptive tender portal. It's now Find a Tender Service, which was formerly the OJU notices so Find a Tender Service is the UK version of that. And you've got the other limits under that, depending on the type of contract. It goes back to that law and the legal framework we work in. But you would say even below those thresholds, we are still bound by principles of transparency, non-discrimination of bidders, equal treatment and so forth, even below those limits. So you've got the regulatory environment. I've talked briefly about the contract procedure rules. They're designed to help staff in their discharge duty of spending of public funds. They've been consulted on widely, both at the member level previously and at officer level, and people find them useful in that regard. So it's worth a quick look at that. So scroll down to procurement functions. Councillor Hopkins talked about the structure of the team. We talked about in 3.1 there. So we're split along. We would have one person who particularly looks at our IT contracts across the council, someone else supporting social care, someone supporting construction. So we tend to group them according to those type of what we call categories of spend. So people build up a certain knowledge of those industries, of those business sectors. And the team will provide advice on all procurement matters and those routes to market particularly, and how we structure and design our contracts, taking into our various legal obligations, whether that's data protection or the Wellbeing Future Generations Act, and providing advice as required on those elements, as well as the sort of core components. I'm just generally flowing through these, they're all in there. And under 3.8, the council operates many different internal working groups, as you can imagine. Climate change is a big thing on the agenda, so we will be a party to that group. And you'll have noted things like the Green Fleet initiatives, the Passive House initiatives, and so forth. And as we work towards this net zero carbon policy of reducing our impact on the environment and so forth. So we'll be in those type of groups to give our opinion, to help push forward our spend in that regard. And as I said, by going out to market regularly, by seeking innovation, that's part of this moving ourselves forward, constantly adapting to the external environment and what's required. I won't dwell on a lot of these. I mean, just we'll often under 3.15, 3.15 work with people like Business Wales to run supplier awareness days. So the Business Wales is an organisation funded by the Welsh Government, and they will be out there helping businesses to grow in Wales. So one of the things they do is collaborate with us to run supplier awareness days, how to work with the council, for example, what opportunities have we got coming up. So, there's collaboration across the public sector in this regard to note as well. And other issues, 3.19, corporate safeguarding group, we contribute to that. So that's where we look at safeguarding and how we report any safeguarding issues, for example, through our contractors. They're often discharging activities on our behalf. They have the eyes and ears on the ground. So there's been a great deal of effort put in there to ensure that they understand what the reporting requirements are, what we expect, and they are articulated in our contracts, basically, and processes and to follow and so forth. So you can see it's a very broad interaction across the council that's taken place, with under 3.20 the council signing up to the charter on ethical employment, for example. And I talked there 3.21, again, climate change, city centre regeneration, the More Homes initiative, another one, the council's people commissioning group, how we look to push forward on social care expenditure and the type of changes that are focused there. We will be feeding into all those groups. Under 4.0, again, I'll go through these very briefly, but for those lower level, under 4.2, for those lower level spends, staff might use a P card, purchase card. And that has been shown to A, provide a good audit trail, so we can see where people are spending money, and B, provide a fairly simplistic way of purchasing small requirements. So that's at the very lowest end of the scale. And then we've got quotations, and we start to move up to things like tenders under 4.5. So these are the bigger procurements where we'll be assessing a lot of variables in how we work with suppliers. So your number of levels depending on the amount of spend. The example I often give is, if you're going to have somebody come into your house and drill a hole in a wall, that is quite different than getting somebody to drill a hole in the wall in a live primary school environment. You know, you're going to ask for a lot more information about someone working in a live environment than you would perhaps in your own home, and why we build up these type of document packs, what we call method statements, and we make sure the contractors have certain qualifications, insurances, and so forth. So yeah, you know, depending on the risk and or the value in question will determine the approach taken. Yeah, and we're looking at, under that approach taken, the evaluation criteria, price, cost, quality are the sort of core components of it. And under quality, you will be looking at social criteria also. I put that at that sort of last dash there of paragraph 4.8, that we can also add social benefit clauses and or sustainability outcomes in tenders. I know that's often of interest in how we go to market also. Sell to Wales, I briefly mentioned that. So we operate, you know, under our own mandate, but we also dovetail with the Welsh Government on a number of issues. And one of them is this Sell to Wales portal. The web link is there. Our tenders will always be advertised in that, on that portal. So it's designed for suppliers, businesses, so they can see and register in one place and know everything that's going on in Wales in one place. That's the design of it. It provides that kind of one-stop shop. The Welsh Government will heavily promote that, and it stops, you know, that kind of each authority having its own system and that disaggregation of opportunities and that lack of visibility for suppliers. So that's the idea behind that. But it's to show that interaction, that the Welsh Government also has a role in this area and providing policy for us that we follow. We're obviously committed to working with local suppliers and supporting the local economy. There are a number of ways we do that. We will split contracts where possible into smallest packets so they're more applicable for smaller companies. We will encourage, where there's a large company, to advertise all its opportunities through Sell to Wales, because we know that'll reach the Welsh supply base. It's a key strand for us now and will remain so going forward, and we're constantly working on that and looking where we can improve what we do. And it's a core part of our council recovery plan also, as we, you know, look to ensure the economy stabilizes and moves forward, given that what we've all encountered these last 14 months. So I mentioned, let's keep moving. I'm moving some of the paperwork here in 4.12, 4.13. What's important to me to note in 4.12, procurement notification forms, this is about this robust process. So anything over £10,000, the procurement team need to be alerted to what that spend is, so we can assess potentially, for example, if there's an existing contract that might be used. Rather than reinvent the wheel in one area, one part of the council, we can say, well, look, another department is already doing something similar to this, or has an ability to provide this for you through an existing contract, and that's where we'll pick out those sort of things. So it comes to that robust governance component of it, and providing good quality support to people, as well as ensuring our time is appropriately allocated. And then at the end of the process, 4.13, we'll be signing off the contracts as per those contract procedure rules I mentioned earlier on. And again, as you can imagine, the larger the value, the more people we will be deploying to assess such contracts. So in terms of recent developments, we've talked about the new contract procedure rules, which were signed off by the council. We're constantly updating our terms and conditions to make sure we're compliant with all relevant legislation and beyond, as I said, with stuff like safeguarding and so forth. DocuSign software is quite interesting. So luckily, before the pandemic hit, we'd moved to an electronic basis of signing off contracts, which allowed us to frankly work seamlessly through the pandemic, because we were able to verify contract sign-offs without having to print stuff off effectively, send it by post, get a copy back, have these things in duplicate. So just in my team, our report says we saved 24,000 pages, which, you know, never mind the time sitting there printing things. So it just shows how technology is helping what we do, and that's been a great success. And the Welsh Government are looking at us as a model of best practice for that. We provide what we call self-service packs for the smaller spend. So users in departments, they can always work with us, but where they're comfortable taking on this work themselves, that again allows a more sort of rapid process and effective use of staff time. We've updated our external website. Actually, if I may, I will see if I can show you that, because that's quite a good document that's been well received. So you're seeing now the Sell to Wales initiative. So this is, it's going to be a microscopic level, I guess, on your screen at the moment. Can I make this bigger? Has that come slightly larger now that says a guide for suppliers? Yeah. So, I mean, this is produced for suppliers. It's in English and Welsh, and it gives them the detail they need in order to understand how they can do business with the council. So this is part of our strand of helping local suppliers, making it simple, basically, explaining the detail. So if I just flip through, you know, it gives them a lot of background information. It talks about Sell to Wales. Sorry, I'm going fast. It's talks about our contract procedure rules so they can see those. It talks about the thresholds. It's basically a mirror of what we're discussing today, presented in a language that suppliers can understand. So I'm flipping through, but at the end, then it gives other, you know, useful contacts for suppliers also, useful background, talks about our social values and community benefits, talks about the future generations and what we expect, so that they, for those that are new to working with us, they can understand the environment in which we work and what we expect from our suppliers, which, you know, has been received well, you know, and it is a useful part of their education, so they can get online and understand what the council's all about. You know, again, we're not dealing with us. We're a big, large organisation with responsibilities, is the best I can put it. And I refer to that primary school example. The way in which we work, whether it's in a social care setting or a school setting, brings its own, you know, requirements, which we must ensure that we are operating in a safe and proper way. Right, back to that document. Councillor Hopkins mentioned the PPE response, where there we were flat out on that, as you can imagine, in the early to middle stages. That the PPE response is now in the later stages been taken over the NHS, thankfully, but that was you know, obviously a key period of work, and all the COVID relief and contract variations are linked to that. As you can imagine, a lot of work going on around that in the last 12 to 18 months. Beyond bricks and mortar, so I'm sure this is well known, but this is where we add extra social value into contracts by providing training and employment opportunities. So our subcontractors therefore will provide these opportunities to people in Swansea, and I give a brief overview of that, and we can supply more information. I won't go into that in detail because I'm sure that's fairly well known. And you talk about some of the organisations we work with, and talks about 2,600 weeks worth of training were achieved through that process. So it shows some of the other value we gain. But again, I'd emphasise whether it's electric vehicles or passive house, you know, there are also additional key social value achieved through the specification in contracts as well. So future challenges and opportunities. I'd probably highlight there paragraph 7.2. The Welsh Government was active for a period in providing collaborative frameworks for us to use. They've kind of withdrawn from that role. Fundamentally, they were trying to provide frameworks for use across the whole of Wales. And the differences, I think, between the north and the south of Wales, for example, meant they didn't always fit local authority needs. They are going to retain, for example, utilities, they will retain a role in that, because that's a fairly decent commodity-based solution that we can all utilise quite easily. So that the Welsh Government will provide an option for us to buy into there to get our green electricity and so forth. And we're investigating green gas through that solution now as well. So at the Welsh level, there are some contracts, but they're decreasing. So there's an area there where we're picking up more workload and collaborating with other authorities to meet that demand. And we are looking, you know, again, under this local supplier umbrella, we had plans to put together a very large event with suppliers, but that was somewhat taken off track with the pandemic. But again, to push back, they are happening at contract level ones, but again, to keep pushing on with the local supplier debate. So I've gone through my report. As I mentioned, there are 2 case studies there, as Councillor Holly requested, to provide, as I said, that extra level of depth on how it actually works in practice. I don't know, Councillor Holly, whether you want me to go through those, but I think they're there to show.
I think first of all, I would ask members or anyone if they got any questions on the report. Anyone? Jeff Jones, Councillor Jeff Jones. Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. Just a couple of points, really. As you know, I got a background in procurement anyway. You know, this local suppliers, you're actually saying that, you know, some of the tenders perhaps are broken up to accommodate, you know, local suppliers. How does that actually affect, should we say, open competition with people outside the area want to actually be involved?
It doesn't, in a sense, because all we're doing there is, instead of saying having one contract for £1 million, we might have 5 contracts for £200,000 each, as an example, as a theoretical example. But you know, so you're breaking up a larger contract into smaller pieces, but all companies can still see the contract because it's published on Sell to Wales. It doesn't, what's the word, discriminate against other suppliers then. So I can see what you're saying, but it's a consideration of what we think is best in the circumstances, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could add to that, Jeff, sorry, if I could, I think what we're trying to do is do the right thing and keep our spending as local as we possibly can. You know, I know it's fair competition, but anything we spend in the area, we want to try and keep so that the area can grow and prosper from what we're doing.
David, you know, I fully agree with you. You know, for local suppliers, my concerns were that no preference, shall we say, was given to local suppliers, where somebody from outside the area perhaps could come back on the council. You know, with regards to, shall we say, favouring local suppliers over other suppliers outside the area. And another thing, what do you call it? You know, you mentioned variations to contract. Shall we say, perhaps the buildings contracts were, you know, renowned for it really, where spec was actually drawn up, procurement actually went out to tender came in, and lo and behold, variations actually appeared. In essence, actually increasing the price of the contract at the end of the day. Who actually agrees that variation? Who signs it off? And who's involved in the process of the variation?
So as you say, we'll have gone out for a contract initially. If there was so the 2 type of variations we'd normally get are where we want to extend things over time. So for example, I don't know, maybe something had been found in the initial dig, which meant a certain delay. So there's time-based variation, and there's the ones you say as a price-based variation. If we deal with price-based variations, they would be proposed by the contract manager, who would be in the service in question. The head of service for that area would agree to it, and I would agree to it, would have to agree to it. So there's a documented process about how we would change a contract. And when we look to change a contract, we work within these contract procedure rules and the law. So we have defined processes, defined parameters, which will either allow us to change something or not allow us to change something. And that will be the determinant. It will be a review of each case to say whether we agree with it, whether it's possible. But yeah, we work in a sort of defined setting for that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Chris, sorry, Chris, I got to leave now. Okay, so okay. I've got 4 more questioners. Phil Downing, Councillor Phil Downing.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. On a smaller scale, between 10 and 25,000, this is vital for small businesses because it's a quick turnaround of money. The question is, how long has this been in place? And what I'm getting at is the 25,000 when it started worth 25,000 now, or should we be looking at increasing that because this is used by most of our small businesses?
Yes, the limits have been increased fairly recently. We did that with Councillor Holly and Councillor Jones's consent through the Constitutional Working Group. I'm trying to think what the limits were previously. I think it was only up to 10,000. So sorry?
It was around about the bottom, and I think, no, sorry, the top limit was 15,000 and we moved it up to 25.
Yeah. So we have increased it recently, and we're always looking to what is the appropriate setting for these things. I agree that area of spend is most, or could be seen to be most attractive for local companies, although often we're working up to the next band up, the £140,000 band as well. But that first band you're talking about there is the self-service packs, where we provide a detailed layer of guidance. Because they're the relatively smaller values in terms of what we deal with, it allows the services in the council to proceed with these purchases, if we call them that, these acquisitions of goods and services, without necessarily having to go through the full sign-off process with us, because they'll be operating under our guidance. But they can use our expertise whenever they want through that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, Phil. Okay, is that it, Phil? Okay, Linda.
Oh, yes, that's it.
Thanks, Chair. The in the report there you talk about supplier awareness days, and obviously it's important for, as we've all said here today, opportunities for local companies, local jobs, because they spend the money locally and they can grow the local economy in our communities. How many local companies are on the list? Because that'll show how effective we are at actually getting them signed up and getting that message out there that we actually want them to apply for these contracts. I don't know if you have that figure.
I don't. I'm sorry to hand, no. Business Wales will often, the Welsh Government's agency for helping businesses grow, will often help us to put these events together. I can ask them if that helps for a breakdown of the companies that they work with. We do also, and we're working with our colleagues in the economic development area in the council to specifically target local companies. Under some of the environmental improvements, the heating systems for new housing builds, we've been working to outreach to local companies with the right qualifications or the right company profile to alert them of tenders. So we do that proactive outreach as well. But yeah, if I may, I can follow that up and provide further information.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I think it's really important. I think Councillor Downing said about the, how it would grow those local businesses. And I think we all are at one on that, because that's what it's about, and getting local jobs as well as the best value and fair competition. But yeah, that would be useful, because we would then know how successful that programme of encouraging local suppliers to sign up to it, how successful we've been, and also if there are any lessons we can learn in getting out to a larger number of companies. But thanks for what you're doing, though. It's you're doing a lot of work in this area.
Okay.
As well,
sorry, Jared. Yeah.
Yeah. Could I just add? Right. This is something I've been on my soapbox, or I know Chris Williams will tell you. I'm keen to grow that economy. You can see I'm passionate about what we do in Swansea, and I don't want that money hemorrhaging out across any bridges. I want to keep that spend as local as we can, and I think it's about upskilling local businesses. And I spoke to Chris how we can do this, right, and work with small business to give them the training and the ability to get, to progress onto our procurement strategy. That's something we are planning. We were planning before COVID. That's something I give a commitment. We still will be doing. As soon as we're able to get round the table, we will do that as a matter of urgency.
Okay. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, Chris, you spoke about in the contract provision 2.3 road helping within staff. I know that we have had issues, which we obviously I'm also on the Audit and Governance Committee, where a lot of the issues are when our audit goes into our schools. And the main issue that comes back with the findings is mainly around procurement. Is there a way that we can work with education to perhaps for training or to perhaps provide a fact sheet? Because I know the schools' budgets are obviously delegated budgets, but in regards when they're obviously procuring, that they know the actual procedure rules, and also within tendering, is there any way that we can perhaps work within education to give that support to our schools?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. So we're working with education, I guess on the back of exactly that sort of trigger, as you're mentioning, the some of the issues that have been found through audit in schools. So we do have a commitment to provide them with training, and in a sense that'll be made easier now through the Teams environment. What we're doing at the moment, or particularly what we've provided to our education colleagues a new set of guidelines, or a revised set of guidelines for them to work through with schools. So they are putting those in practice right now and finishing them off with the school infrastructure to get them agreed. And then we'll have an updated set of guidance accompanied by training. So the quick answer is we will be doing exactly as you suggest, and providing the support to schools that they need. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, Mike. Councillor Wendy Jones Fitzgerald.
Oh, thank you. Yes, mine is a very basic question. When we go out to tender, do we always get responses? I know a community council is a completely different beast, but there have been occasions when the community council I'm on goes through South Wales, we go out to tender, and we get one response, or we get zero response. And for the money that we are being spent, we are required to have 3 responses. It's very difficult sometimes. Now, is that situation applicable to Swansea Council, or do we always get responses to invitations?
The situation,
I said that's a good question, Chris, because I can remember some of the responses you had.
We do typically do get responses, is the truth. I think because the value that we go out to market with are larger, and it does attract a lot of businesses. We're always looking to get a healthy level of competition, and we will be, I think everybody's looking to review the specification, what we've gone out to market with. If we didn't get, a significant number of inquiries, I think we'd be looking to learn from that. But I don't recall that we don't get any tender responses, no. And I think that's part of the fact they're quite large, chunky requirements. So for businesses, they're pretty important pieces of work. I mean, and just on your point, with the community council, I don't know the rules and designs behind that. But normally what we would be saying is you go out to market and you ask, those companies, if they choose not to bid, under the rules, you will have satisfied that obligation. But the point is you did actually go out to market, you did offer it for competitive purposes, and you didn't just give it to one company, is the guidance in the law and the rules typically.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Mary Sherwood. Mary?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I wanted to come in to echo Lyndon's point about local procurement, and that it would really be good to see how effective our strategies for supporting local businesses really are. I think it's good to acknowledge that that's something that we're trying to build in, but I think Lyndon's right to say we should be checking how effective is that and what else can we do. And with that in mind, obviously people will have heard of the Preston model, and I know that Matthew Brown of Preston Council is quite quite rightly sort of modest about that and says that Preston didn't invent it. They were just the first council in the UK that really took it off and kind of made a big point about what you can do with it. And as a result of putting certain items into procurement contracts from the public sector out to the private sector, Preston now has the highest rate of people paid the real living wage of anywhere in the UK. So as well as supporting local businesses, there's the writing in of additional social value and making sure that wealth gets held within an area and expanded. Now, Preston Council didn't come up with that on their own. They involved an organisation called the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, who came and gave them a lot of support with developing their approach in a way that was right for them. And I would suggest that Swansea needs similarly some direction about what approach would be right for us. And I wonder if there are any plans, or if it's already happening, that we talk to external organisations who have that expertise and can help us refine our procurement approaches to get some of the results that they've had in Preston. Thanks.
I mean, we're absolutely committed to that approach, I think is the truth in all, as Councillor Hopkins was mentioned. Through the Public Service Board, we are actually already working with that Centre for Local, so it's CLES, the acronym. So we are actually already working with them. The Welsh Government is paying for that support, so that's absolutely ongoing now, and we will seek to learn where we can from that. To be fair to the Welsh Government and also the External Future Generations Commissioner Office, we're working with them also. We've also worked with RAP Cymru to look at our environmental profile. So we do certainly engage with those external organisations. I'm also chair of something called the Mid and West Wales Procurement Network. So there we collaborate with local authorities, plus the fire and rescue services to look at, again, and that's one of the key topics we're trying to learn from each other from there around, well, both local suppliers and the wider social agenda. I sit on an All Wales group which looks at this as well. I spoke to the Welsh Government yesterday about how we work between us and push forward on these policies. So I'm just trying to illustrate there's many layers where we're trying to be the best that we can be and learn from each other and improve. And again, say Councillor Hopkins is supporting us in that journey and pushing us on the journey as well, to say it's a critical one for the council. So yes, there's many avenues in train. It's one of those. It's an interesting debate in a sense, because you're looking at, as you mentioned, the layers of the wages that are paid to employees. Where is the actual impact of the contract? Where are people actually employed? Because you could have a company headquartered outside of Wales, but which employs a lot of people in Wales, in Swansea, and there, you just drive Swansea, you'll see many company names which have big bases of staff. So we're trying to manage all these different variables. But yeah, as a headline, absolutely keen to learn, and certainly, as you request and Councillor Jones request, will feedback on that and provide further information.
Okay, Mary. Wendy, you still get your hand up?
Sorry.
Okay. Now, thank you, Chris. Are there any other members who wish to ask questions of Chris on the report? The reason I asked Chris to come forward with a couple of case studies is because the first one is one which we had a scrutiny board on many years ago, which spent a great deal of time on procurement of community care and I think it was domiciliary care. Now, this is an issue, going back to what Councillor Mary Sherwood said about social responsibility and the costs, etc., one which is particularly difficult to manage and particularly different when we are procuring it. And I know if anybody has read through it, you will see how difficult it is. And I know, Chris, we've had this discussion many times about how you can actually get the quality of care you need and the value of care that you need, and the providers and how they do it, and the number that have actually gone out of business over the last 4 or 5 years. And you know, I think we got to take hold at the moment because of the pandemic and wait and see what the outcome of that will be. Isn't that, Chris? Because I think you'll agree that the pandemic has actually made some of these procurement issues in that particular field very, very difficult. Not Chris?
I think, yeah, it's definitely being flagged up. There's obviously a lot of dialogue with suppliers. We've provided, you know, I think a fair degree of understanding with them as we work through the pandemic. It really threw everything up in the air for a period for everyone in all parts of the council. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's no doubt. Well, just looking at the economic figures and the contraction of the economy, and then, you know, it's thankfully come back somewhat in the last few months. It's certainly, everybody's keeping a very close watching brief and very regular dialogue with suppliers and trying to be very sensitive to that situation. Yeah, luckily so far things have gone, you know, reasonably well, and fingers crossed. I think much of it depends on that economic situation, and yeah, it's a nervous time.
So in that particular case, what I suggest is we ask Chris at some time in the next 6 months or so, once we've seen what will be the new norm, for the want of a better term, and then if he can come back and give us an update on what's happened with that. The second case study is one which is about engineering and the highways. Now this one is something which, going back over 20 years ago, was always a case study of, you know, how you get the right contractor in the right place at the right time and get value for money, because on the highways issues it can be very, very difficult. We have got a list of people that we can call in to do particular work. If we go back to the Kingsway, when one particular contractor went bust, I think it was is it Dawson's? No, Jonas, and then Donna, sorry, and then we brought in Griffiths, who was on our panel anyway. But all that difference is then is the cost difference. So there are two different types of procurement, but I think it's important that, you know, people understand that the highway one, isn't it, Chris, is a different animal completely to social services procurement.
Yeah, absolutely. Different outcomes required, different approach to the market. I suppose there's commonality in the sense that you want a good process that finds you the best partner to work with, that passes all the checks and balances and provides the right quality. But as you say, then you're into each of those specific sectors and the demands and challenges they face. And obviously in the council you have a social care team which is heavily specialised in that area, and we also work with a highways team and a construction team heavily, so they bring that expertise also for those sectors, and we provide that sort of then general knowledge as to how we work with these sort of companies. But yeah, I think those two case studies provide a good, you know, show the breadth of what we're involved in.
Has anybody got any questions on the case studies? No. David, sorry, Councillor Hoggan, would you like to? Oh, David, anyway. Would you like to say anything on the case studies?
No, I think you summed it up. You know, the difference between social care and certainly highways are massive. But I suppose they're similar in some respects, but they carry as much risk in some respects, because you look at the construction industry, and before the pandemic, it was really an unstable. So the construction industry itself do bring risks. There's no doubt about it. Different risks, obviously, to working with social care. But who would have seen Donuts going out the way they did? I wouldn't have seen that happening. They were one of the biggest local contractors on the scene within Swansea at that time. But yet again, that shows the unstableness of the construction industry in the world, not just the UK.
Okay. If there's no other questions, can I thank Chris and David for coming along today? I'm sure that we would like to ask them to come again in some time in the future to report back on on what we've been talking about today. I just noticed, Adam, did you want to say anything?
No, thank you, Chair. I was just in support of Chris. He's the expert in the field, and I look to him to lead on this. But it was just here if there was anything sort of a wider concept that I needed to pick up on behalf of Resources Portfolio.
Okay, righto, thank you. So if that is the case, then can I thank you all, the officers for coming along, and Councillor Hopkin, and then if we then revert to the next item on the agenda, which is the planned inquiry into procurement terms of reference. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, David. Pardon?
Should I leave the meeting now? Is that okay?
It's entirely up to you. You can stay if you want to. If you got.
I have to stay if it's okay. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, fine.
No, thank you.
Okay, Michelle.
Yes, this is an updated, we did this at the beginning of the inquiry, which was back in 2019 when it got put on hold. But this is a breakdown of the terms of reference, and I've updated the project plan, obviously put in some estimated dates, etc. in. Really, it's just want you to double check that it's still okay. If we've got everything we need to include, obviously we can include more as we go along if things arise. But it's a basic plan. And just to let you know, I have contacted internal audit so that we can get them sort of scheduled in as soon as possible. And we've got a tentative date of the 27th of July for that. So we'll just need to put together some key questions, which I'll send round to you later today, and then we can get them on the case as well. So once you've agreed your way forward, I can then start contacting the people on the list and get them all booked in. So it's just a case of having a discussion and agreeing your inquiry plan, really.
Has anybody had a look at the plan and is happy with it? Councillor Sherwood, Mary.
Thanks, Chris. I do remember mentioning it at one point, obviously a very long time ago, back in 2019, that I was particularly interested and a bit concerned about the procurement for school cycle training, and that represented to me a small example that we could easily look at to see how it had come about that a local provider that we already had good links with was then passed over in favour of a provider from England who we didn't have any previous knowledge of, and who actually was proposing to be paying the exact same instructors less money. And I think there was an agreement that would be a handy quick case study for us to look at. Now, since then, I've become a trustee of Bikeability Wales, so I have more of an interest now than I did then, which of course I do have to declare. But also what's happened is that the provider from England has gone bust, leaving a gap in provision, and a lot of the workers, it's a very, very limited field of workers, cycle trained people, have basically departed and gone into other fields. And actually, you could perhaps draw a line to say that the council withdrawing that support from Bikeability Wales at that time and going to a different provider who turned out not to be so safe, perhaps, has actually had an impact on the whole provision of cycle training locally, because the trainers have gone off to do other things now, and there actually isn't a facility in Wales to train new ones. So I think that what I would say is the landscape has become even more interesting as a case study than it was when I first suggested that we look at that. And I would still be quite interested in looking at that to see how did it come about that decision got made. That's really what I'm interested in understanding. And I think that would give us all a bit more insight into how, on the ground, when we're making a comparison between a local provider and a more distant provider, how do our rules work, and might they be tweaked to allow us to give more preference to a local provider in future? That's just...
Yeah, just saying we've speaking to Place. Hopefully we can get them in August, and that obviously would fall within their remit. We could ask them to specifically give that as one of their case studies that they bring forward, and then you can discuss that. Would that be okay?
I think that would be okay, Mary.
I would really welcome that if that's all right with you, Chair. Yeah.
Lovely. I'll note that down.
I think on the internal audit one, I'm not sure about other members feel, but I think we could actually combine internal audit with place, because I think the questions we'd have for internal audit would be more inclined to be what their processes of what the process of them examining procurement is. And I think that's more of a paper exercise than somebody coming along and speaking to us. I don't know how other members feel about that, but I think, you know, that might be more of an exercise in how their processes work in auditing, for the want of a better way of auditing the process, the procurement exercise. Michelle?
Yeah, I've spoken to the chief auditor briefly, just to find out what they can do. So we could send them a list of questions. You probably want them to come along, because you're thinking they're going to ask you questions about how they audit to ensure ethical, you know, and all those sort of things. Be quite useful for that, I think. I've got a list of questions that you might find useful, and also, you know, what the local auditor, whether there's an external auditing of procurement and all that sort of stuff, will probably be useful as well to see what else is done, you know. Yeah, I mean, we can try and get in both. It's just a case of trying to get people on certain dates, isn't it? And if we can get people soon enough.
If everybody's happy about that, then we will look at bringing in an internal audit. Let's call it audit, in sometime in July or August, and then move on to social services in probably September, and then the next one would be education, isn't it?
Yeah, I put education in September because obviously August is no good around schools, is it, and information, so they're probably best to do later in September. But what I can do is I can just try and fit people in as their you know, diaries allow, really, and so you may have to move things around a little bit, but hopefully we can get some sort of basic schedule. That's just to give an indication, really. But if you're happy, I've got, hopefully audit can come on the 27th of July as a kicking off point, really.
Okay. The only thing is, Mary, Councillor Sherwood just say about the Preston model, and I think we did promise that at some stage that we would get a copy of that and send it out to all members of the panel, so they could see what it was, see what it's around. It's more of a social contract than anything else, I think.
Because there was another one, wasn't there, that I think I've got on the work programme there, that was, I think it was something in Cardiff as well, wasn't there?
That's the social contract. That was the social what they call it, the social responsibility procurement, but that's actually very much similar to our Beyond Bricks and Mortar, but we can get a copy of it anyway, because when we brought in Beyond Bricks and Mortar, it was, well, actually it was copied from a European procurement booklet, which they used to actually encourage more social responsibility. So I think it's virtually the same, but if you can get a copy of it, then send that around.
Because I was going to say that one of the sessions you could have could be potentially, you know, after you've had a look at some of these, you know, we could maybe do a remote meeting with one of the authorities or one of these people. I mean, we've got it further down, haven't we, to look at sort of social procurement and what's being done elsewhere. So we could actually, you know, look at what would be the best and actually, you know, physically speak to them, which would be ideal, because it's, you know, this new remote way of working will make it much easier, won't it, for us to do that?
Yes, you know, I don't fancy, I don't know about others, but a trip to Preston at the moment is a bit out of the question, I think. So a remote meeting would be ideal.
Lovely.
Okay, is everybody happy with that? And I suggest that we conclude the meeting, and thank you all very much for coming, and can I thank the officers and the cabinet member for their responses, and I look forward to seeing you again. Okay, take care all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Michelle, can you stay on for a minute?
Yep, just finished recording now, one sec.